Hello and welcome to Tell Us Your Effing Story, a BDC Partners podcast. BDC is a leading franchise and retail advisory firm. Our podcast is by franchisors for franchisors, where we go behind the scenes with some of the most interesting characters in the franchising industry. I'm your host, Bruce McFarlane, with my co-host, John Sully, and today here with Claire Wilson, the CEO of the Alternative Board, or TAB. Which one is it?
The Alternative Board.
Alternative Board, okay. So thank you for joining us, John.
Claire, tell us your fucking story.
Okay, John, it's franchising story.
Sorry,
it's Claire's.
Yeah. I do get that mixed up a bit, I apologise.
We're talking about franchising. So before we get to franchising, though, we're going to go right back. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your background, things as a kid. What did you enjoy doing?
Absolutely. So, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from Australia.
Not from Brisbane?
No, strangely not. No, I actually started out life in the UK. I was born in the UK. So grew up there, and...
Whereabouts?
I actually hate that question because my parents moved around a lot when I was a child. So I was never anywhere longer than about 4 years.
Cute little village.
Well, yes,
somewhere.
I lived in lots of little villages, but in lots of different places. So I was born in Shrewsbury, but when I was 9 months old, my parents moved to Scotland, and then they moved 4 years later back down to England in the Worcestershire area, and then they moved again and again. So I don't really have somewhere that I've lived all my life or grew up in. So I was moving around. So I became kind of a robust kid because in terms of making friends, became very, very capable of just walking into a new space and finding people I could engage with. But probably there's two underlying things from my childhood. One is that I actually enjoyed school, unlike most kids. I actually love learning. And so really enjoyed school and found it relatively easy compared to other kids. But the other was also sport. I was also really good at sport. So my childhood was really just school and sport most of the time, because I actually, while I could play lots of sports at a high level, eventually tennis emerged as the one that was the leader. And I actually got to the point where as a junior I was playing internationally, represented the UK at an international level.
Good on you.
And I was balancing that with school.
How old were you when all that was happening?
I started at 5.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And I retired at 17.
Big career.
No, the reason I retired was because I was actually offered a scholarship to a US university, a sports scholarship.
Yeah.
And I'd also been offered a place at Oxford University.
Wow.
And I had a choice.
Yeah.
And I actually made the sensible choice and chose Oxford because I felt like if I went the sports direction, I was putting all my eggs in one basket, and if it didn't pan out, then I had nothing else. So I chose the Oxford route. That, unfortunately, back in those days, was seen as an indicator of no interest in the sport, and I was just dropped from every squad overnight. I had a very similar experience to international athletes, adults you see now, and then afterwards they go, "Oh my God, who am I?" Because you've had this as part of your life for your whole life, and then all of a sudden it's ripped away from you, and there's no support. Nobody calls you. You just don't get invited to the next thing, and then you wonder what's going on. So
do you ever wonder if you went the other way?
No, I actually know I made the right mistake because I shortly afterwards.
Right mistake?
Sorry.
Hang on.
Yeah. I actually believe I made the right decision because shortly afterwards I actually got injured.
Right.
And if I got injured, that would have... And the injury I had probably would have meant that I didn't quite make it. For a few years afterwards, it was interesting, though, because I'd be watching the TV and my peers, who I used to beat, would be turning up at Wimbledons and US Opens and things like that. Okay, none of them went on to win them, or it would be a name that you've ever heard of. But even so, it was my dream as a child to play at those places, and I didn't. So it was kind of a bit
Fuck, I hope you went and heckled them at those tournaments and said, "I used to kick your ass when I was 6."
I read a book about the tennis, the home of tennis, like the UK, and there's a book called The Goldmine Effect where a guy followed professional sports people and why did some make it and some, because in the UK they're all the resources, the home of tennis, it's such a thing. But I think at one point when the book was written, 25% of the top female tennis players were all Russian. And it's like, why would the US and UK spend so much money on it and stuff? So there was a lot of money spent on it, but it was like not many were actually making it.
No,
around that time, like in your
absolutely.
peers, they didn't get there
No.
because they were coming in from everywhere else. And often it was because of economics. The other kids didn't have Oxford University opportunities.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was their road out
Yeah.
of where they were, and so whereas you obviously had education
Multiple
so you had a choice.
It was partly that, but I actually now, in hindsight, particularly having moved to Australia and seen how well Australia did at understanding sport was more than just physical, and you needed to have the mental game to go with it. There was none of that back in the day when I played. There was none of it. There was no support for how to handle the big stage, the mental side of it. And I actually remember getting told off because I was 11. I was in the national championships and I just lost to somebody I shouldn't have lost to, and I was crying, and I got told off for crying.
Jeez.
That was the sort of
when
culture
was that?
at the
What sort of years
time.
were that?
That would have been. I know. I just got to really think. That would have been in the 80s.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what? Just getting back to Mum and Dad.
Yep.
Why the moving? What was what did your parents do? What was their?
It was predominantly driven by my dad. He was quite a smart guy in the industry that he was in, and no education. Neither of my parents had much of an education because they came from a relatively humble background. But my dad was actually also dyslexic, and that's why I hadn't done well at school, because I didn't understand dyslexia back in those days. But when he actually got into the workforce, he was just a naturally talented person. So he started off as a draftsman, but he's found his way to actually starting to run those businesses. And so the organisation he was with, he had a real talent for turning businesses around. He's really good at the culture side of it. So the business he worked for just started moving him around from problem business to problem business to problem business within their group. And so we just followed along as he went. Probably the most stable period was actually when we were in Cambridgeshire, and that's actually where I developed my sort of business sense, because my parents moved to a property that had was used to be a large orchard. The orchard had been broken up and houses had been built around it, but we still had about 1.5 acres of this orchard. And where the road we were on had a lot of trucks go down it. And so I decided during my school holidays one year that I would pick fruit, and I would put a bench outside the house and start selling fruit out the front.
Yep.
And I learned quite a lot from that. First of all, I learned not everyone's honest, because I just had a little honesty box there.
Yeah.
And some days I'd come out and people had stolen all the fruit and the honesty box.
Right.
What fruit were you selling?
Oh, all sorts of things. Apples, pears, plums, you name it. There was a whole range of
fucking English people.
I know. Tell me about it. But I still made quite a bit of money out of it.
Yeah.
But I also learned about how to not just do it by myself, because I was playing tennis. So the main fruit season would be the summer. That's also the main tennis season. So I would need to go and play tennis in tournaments, and I wanted my little business to carry on. So I got my sister and her friends to agree to do work for me when I wasn't there by giving them the opportunity to, they were younger than me, to wear my clothes, or, I do deals with them.
I like it.
To persuade them to go and top up the fruit if it was empty and things like that. So yeah, that was my first little move into business.
So just back to tennis very quickly.
Yep.
Give us a famous person that you played and you beat. Anyone?
It wasn't a full match. It was sort of a little bit of a few games, but I played Jo Jury.
Right.
Who you probably don't know, but she was the number 1 tennis player in the UK at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Good on you.
So do you still follow tennis?
Yes and no. I still quite enjoy it, but I don't really have the time to
Come down to
sit and
Melbourne
watch
for the
it too
Aussie
much.
Open?
I have been to the Open in Melbourne, yeah, and it was really great. But most of the tournaments are not in our time zone, so unfortunately, I don't see as much of it as I would like to.
And at school then, so you said you did well at tennis, and it's interesting. Like, you've obviously got the discipline to, in sport to to get to a high level. But then in school, so you mentioned Oxford. So what were the subjects when you were little? What subjects were you interested in?
So for me, the subject that I had to put no effort into whatsoever was maths. I just had a brain that could do it. I didn't have to, as soon as it was explained, I just knew how to do it. So I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but it was actually the one that was like the free pass for me. So when I was doing at the latter stage of sort of high school and we were sort of picking subjects, I was trying to be pushed into a maths career because it was so obvious that I found it easy. I couldn't think of anything worse.
And what is a maths career?
Well, quite.
What is it, like a data scientist or something? Is it?
In my head, I felt that I'd spend the rest of my life trying to prove that 1 + 1 is 2, something like that. So I had no interest, but I still took maths and further maths because they were two A's I knew I was going to get.
Yeah.
And then I would pick from other subjects. So I actually went very much down the science route because I chose to go down the engineering route at that point, mainly because they were the subjects that I found easiest rather than because I was passionate about them. In hindsight now, having been through that career and come out the other side, I now realise that it wasn't the best fit for who I am as a person. I just didn't realise that at the time. But I don't regret it because I got a really good solid education and learnt really good critical thinking and logical thinking from the experience of having gone through that.
So that's what you did at Oxford, was engineering?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously hard to get into. I'm not I assume it's similar to trying to get into the hard universities here. It's based on a score that you get at high school, and is it
it's also interviews. So they interview you. That was sort of an interesting journey for me, and there's always little things that happen through your life that ultimately make you stronger, but for temporarily can affect you quite deeply. So obviously I was going to university around a time that I'd just been dropped from all the squads in tennis. So I was already a little unsettled as to who I was as a person, and I went through the process to get into Oxford and did all the interviews, and to my surprise got in. And then I turned up at university at the beginning and found that I was the only female on my course in my college. Now, the interesting thing about that is Oxford is a collection of colleges that forms a whole university. So the education for the engineering is actually done. The lectures are done centrally, so all the colleges, everybody from all the colleges attends the lectures, but your tutoring happens within your college. And the college I was at, prior to the year I went, was a female-only college, but it was now a mixed college. So we were the first mixed year in the intake. So I turn up at the beginning to only be the only female on the course in what used to be an all-female college, which was a little different. And right from the outset, the guys, I don't know, they seem to have this sort of chip on the shoulder, but I didn't really see it as that at the time, were constantly going, "Oh my God, how stupid are you?" every time I asked a question, and really making me feel really inferior. So I got this impression right at the beginning of my journey that I was a token female. I was only there because they wanted to say there was a female on the course. And it really affected my sense of self. And it wasn't helped by the fact that when you went into the engineering department, I went to the toilet for the first time and opened the door, and there was a urinal just there. And I thought, am I in the right place? And so
there's no female toilets because there's no female engineers.
Exactly. They were, but they were on the admin floor.
They were the only. We're not talking all that long ago.
No. Not really. It's changed a lot now.
That's shit, isn't it? It's a real boys' club.
It was a real boys' club. I actually later learned, as I was in, the course was 4 years. It was a master's as well. And as I was leaving, I had a conversation with one of the tutors, and I talked about how I'd felt at the beginning. And I actually, after my bachelor's, won a scholarship. Because I was the only one who got a first class degree in my bachelor's. And again, the guys were all going, "Oh well, if we'd worked as hard as you, we would have done this." And I was like going, "Yeah,
no
but
shit, sure."
But you didn't.
I know, and I was also going, but I also played. I was a road for the college. I played hockey for the college. I played tennis for the college. I was like going, "What did you do?" Oh, I don't think you did anything, did you?
Drank.
Drank. So, but anyway, I ended up having a conversation with a tutor at the end, and they confessed to me that they had interviewed an additional 40 women trying to find another female to be on the course with me and didn't find one that was up to scratch. So I wasn't a token female. I was the female they wanted, and they made a huge amount of effort to find others, and just didn't find any that were at the level.
And did many come after you in that? Like, did many female engineers
started to change over time?
Up?
Yeah, it started to change over time.
Paved the way.
I think it's quite different. I later on in my first job, I had there was a young girl came in who was just about to go to university as a holiday intern kind of thing, and she'd been offered a place at Oxford, so she was probably 10 years or so younger than me, and it was really great to see her journey was so different.
Yeah, that's
because I became friends with her. I sort of mentored her and guided her into her journey into Oxford. And I actually went and visited her. She went to a different college, but I went and visited her while she was there. Her journey completely different, So
does it like university life in the UK? Like in Australia, a lot of kids just live at home because the big universities are in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, and so. But I think everyone lives on college, so everyone's away from home pretty much.
At Oxford, yes, but it has changed in the UK. Back in the day when I went to university, I was pretty much the last year that went to university for free.
Yeah. Okay.
So I had to pay my living expenses because grants we were at tail end of the grants that used to be available, but the education itself was actually free. So I had to have a student loan to cover my living expenses, but
so
I didn't need one for education. So you were free to go to university anywhere because the cost of doing so wasn't hideous.
Yeah.
We had to pay for our accommodation, but it was highly subsidised, so it wasn't expensive. My sister, who's only 3 years younger than me, on the other hand, by that time, when she went to university, she had to pay for everything. So it started to change, just like it is here. So it started to change the culture in the UK. They do now. While still people aspire to go away to university in the UK, and universities are set up to have large campuses because that's how it's always been, it's starting to change that a lot more people will choose a university that's close to home to minimise the expense of being there. But more of a culture of going away. It's kind of seen in the UK as part of growing up. Go away from home. It isn't just about the education. It's about living by yourself, learning to make decisions, and your independence when you leave university.
So now you've got your engineering degree. You're working businesses like Dyson and Fisher and Paykel and stuff, working in those sorts of roles. How did that come about?
So having gone to Oxford, one of the sort of standard careers leaving Oxford is to go and work for one of the big four. So PwC, all of those kind of guys, and they come into Oxford and they recruit like crazy, and they actually wanted me. Now it was very, very tempting because the money they offer was great, and they sort of did what I at that time thought I might want to do in the future, but I don't know why. But while my peers were all going that route, I said to myself, I don't feel comfortable going into a world as a consultant and telling people what to do in their business when I've never actually been in one. So instead, I chose to take a role with Dyson, and I actually got the role right at the beginning of my final year. So during my final year at uni, I knew exactly where I was going after uni. And what appealed to me about Dyson, they didn't pay me anywhere near what the guys were going to pay at PwC and so on, but it was at that time almost an unknown entity. They had the DC-01, one vacuum cleaner. That was the only product they had. It had gone well, but they were so young, so innovative. They had so many ideas of what they wanted to do, and I just saw it as an opportunity to walk into a company where I would get to experience everything. And that would give me a good grounding for the future. And it was a great decision. I mean, when I was there, we were working on washing machines, refrigerators, dishwashers, but not your normal ones. Like the dishwasher was one that would effectively load itself. I mean, I didn't put the dishes in it, but the drawers would open automatically, and you'd just have to put things in, and fridges where it would know you wanted something and open the doors for you. All these innovative things, none of them ever came to market.
So what were you doing for them? Were you designing?
Start off with, that's where I started. So it's funny because for a long time I couldn't talk about anything I worked on because nothing had ever made it to market, and I was told that I couldn't talk about it till it did.
Secret school.
But I worked on them. I actually designed the original motor that went on to be the reason they were able to create the Airblade hand dryer that you see in all the public toilets and so on, and also their automatic vacuum cleaner. So I actually designed the motor. In fact, I haven't been there, but I'm told that there is now a sort of museum at Dyson in the UK. And my first prototype is actually in the museum as part of the story of how those products came to market. So yeah, I started out just going in as a junior sort of graduate design engineer. But what they very quickly realised is that I was really good at knowing what was going on in the wider organisation, because we were working on things that were highly secret. The company was organised so you had a lab that you were allowed access to, but you couldn't go into any of the other labs. So it was very sort of compartmentalised. So people only tended to know about what they were working on in that lab. Somehow I managed to get myself into every lab. Through making connections with people and adding value and things like that. Not deliberately. It wasn't a deliberate ploy. Yeah. It was just how I was. Yeah. So I very quickly got moved into project management roles and starting to run a little team, and very, very, very early on. So I got all this other experience as well as being although predominantly a design engineer, I got all this other experience as well. So
it's great.
An engineer with people skills also.
Yeah, basically. And my boss used to come to me and ask me what was going on in the organisation and what he should know about, because he knew I would know and he had no idea.
And most of the engineers just want to build stuff.
Yeah.
That's great. So how long was that for, Dyson? I
was there about 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And so your other role, so we're gonna end up at Tab talking, but you ended up coming to the other side of the world in the industry as well. So
yes, I did.
New Zealand first stop before
it
Australia?
It was. So between Dyson and coming to New Zealand, I actually worked for the Williams Formula One team for a short period.
Designing race cars.
Elements of race cars, yeah, absolutely. It was my worst and best job ever. The highs were really high, the lows were really low. Very much a boys' club.
You sound like you've had a few of those, though.
It was, but to an extreme, where it actually wasn't very pleasant to work in the environment. So I didn't stay there very long, and that's when I was looking around for what I'm going to do next, because I sort of felt this is a dream job, pinnacle, but actually it isn't. So everybody was envious of me, but in reality I was sitting there going, actually this isn't that great. Yeah. And that's when I made the decision that I wanted to use my people skills, not my tech skills. And I was looking for jobs in the UK to stay there in that space, and actually been offered a sales role with a tech company, but in a sales role. But at the same time, Fisher & Paykel headhunted me and offered me a role in New Zealand. And it was a tough choice, but I sat there, and at the age of whatever I was, 25 or whatever it was, I went, the appeal of someone paying for me to move to the other side of the world, to a country I'd never been to, when I'd always said I wanted overseas experience, just overwhelmed all the downsides of staying in the tech world. Instead of moving in the career direction I wanted. So I just decided that's what I was going to do. My now husband I'd met 2 months before that. And I just said to him, I'm going. You can come with me if you like. I'm not going to stop you. But I'm going regardless of whether you want to go or not. We didn't leave for another 10 months after that, because I had a house I just bought as well, which was a wreck and needed to be put back together before I could sell it and leave.
And they just kept your job open for 10 months.
Yeah, because they knew they had to wait anyway, because I had to get visas and things like that. So they weren't expecting a quick turnaround from the job offer. 10 months pushed the limits of what they were going to tolerate. If I had not left at 10 months, I think they'd have probably withdrawn the job offer. But they were expecting 6. So 10 wasn't too much of a stretch. And my now husband, he wasn't at the time, decided to go with me. So it turns out to be a good decision on his part. It's good. I should say it's a good decision on mine, but I was going anyway. So
he's followed you in.
Yeah, that's great. What was the role for Fisher & Paykel?
It was a team lead, a technical team leader role.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't really the role I wanted, but it was my pathway to a new experience on the other side of the world.
And then, so that was Auckland, I think you said.
It was
so
Auckland,
went
yeah.
to Auckland, lovely city, and you were there for 10 years.
About
is
10
that
years,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And stayed with them the whole time?
No. It was when I arrived at Fisher and Paykel, it became very clear very quickly that their culture was very slow moving. I was used to quite an intense environment where when someone
Race
said,
cars.
Yeah.
when someone says it's
Chalk and
urgent,
cheese, really,
when
isn't it?
someone said it was urgent, it meant drop what you're doing and do it now. So I arrived at Fisher and Paykel, and they come to me with something and say this is urgent. I drop it and do it now. Hand it back to them, and they go, didn't need it for another week. Because their pace was just so slow. And I realised very early on I could do my job in a week's job in probably a day or two of the week. Now, some people would have thought, wow, that's luxury. I can sit back and do nothing for the rest of the week. That's not me. The weeks just seem to drag on and be really long, and I'd find it hard to... And then I'd start playing games with myself and deliberately leave things to the last minute because I needed to incorporate some kind of challenge into it, you know. And then sort of later when I was there, I started to try and make the move into the commercial side of the business while I was with them, thinking that would be the way to get my engagement back. It shows that sometimes in larger organisations, different people don't talk to each other, because I went and interviewed for a marketing role and I pretty much got told I got it. And then the next thing I knew, my manager was telling me I hadn't got it. And what turned out is that they didn't want to let me go from the engineering team because I was too good in the engineering team. So they blocked me going into the marketing team. The marketing team had told me I got the job. And I was like, and that started to impact my feelings towards the organisation.
Yeah,
and then a similar thing happened with my husband as well, where he was struggling in New Zealand to find, at that time, long-term employment. And I'd suggested he went for a job that was available at Fisher and Paykel that was a good fit. But that was going to be in Dunedin, at the Dunedin branch. And I said to Matt, if we move to Dunedin, I'm okay with that, because you need to be able to get a job. So he went for that job. They flew him down to Dunedin. Again, he did the interview. They told him pretty much there and then he got the job. And then it didn't happen because, again, they blocked it from to not let me go. They didn't allow him to take that job. So I lost my faith in the organisation that there would be a future there. So unfortunately I was tied to them for 3 years because they paid for me to move. They didn't pay for my visa, I did that, but it was just because they paid for the move. I had a 3 year, so I stayed there 3 years, and then from there I left and went on to do other things, which ultimately led to the move to Australia.
Right. And that was how long ago was that? Was that like 10 years ago as well?
It's about 12 years ago, I think, that we moved to Australia, yeah.
Yeah. And that was, so where did you come straight into the TAB stuff? No, you didn't.
No, I didn't. So my last role in New Zealand, I have skipped a few, but my last role in New Zealand, I was GM of a large a large small business in New Zealand. So about $13 million turnover, sort of around there. But it was listed because all their markets were actually outside New Zealand. So they needed heavy investment to be able to get the export going, and it was very innovative technology. So there's a lot of investment there. When I left, that was my job, and then I decided I needed to move on from there, and that was where I started to realise the New Zealand market was not going to really fulfil my career in the long term, because I was still young. I was still in my 30s, and yet I was at this point and I was thinking, there's not much here for the next 40 years of my career, or whatever it turned out to be, in New Zealand. So we made a conscious decision that I would look for roles in Australia. We narrowed it down to Brisbane or Perth because we wanted to get a lifestyle here. As much as I love Melbourne and Sydney, house prices made me feel I was never going to get the lifestyle there, or us feel that was never going to get a lifestyle there. So we made the decision to look for jobs in Brisbane and Perth. And the first one I happened to get was in Brisbane. For a mining parts company in Murarrie, which doesn't exist anymore because it's been taken over by an a US large conglomerate and incorporated into other things. But that was my pathway into Australia. I've only had 2 roles other than the alternative board, that, and then I left there to go to a large corporate role, which didn't turn out to be what I thought a corporate role would be. I thought it was longevity of career into the future. Only what I discovered is once you've finished your role in Australia in a corporate, if you've done a good job, they want to send you overseas. And after a conversation with my husband, who'd followed me around the world, I'd worked in the UK, New Zealand, and the US. He finally put his foot down and said, I'm not moving again. So that made it very clear my corporate career wasn't going to progress the way I wanted it to, and that's how the alternative board came to.
And what attracted you to the alternative board? What did you see in that? Because obviously that's quite a different thing, role in a business role. One, it's a franchise, but 2, we'll get to that part of it. But just the fact that they're very different from engineering and then looking at marketing roles and all that sort of stuff.
So just explain first what it is.
So our tagline is that we improve businesses in the ways that change business owners' lives. And what that means, and if you ask us what we want to achieve, we want every business owner in Australia to have the support they need to achieve their personal and business goals. So where we started as a business owner coaching and peer advisory board business, where we were really focused on understanding the business owner, what aspirations they have in life. So do they want to spend time with friends and family? Do they want to generate wealth? What is it they're looking to achieve? And then provide them coaching to achieve that by making sure their business is going to deliver on it, and the opportunity to sit around the table with other business owners and learn from the experiences that they have, to hold them accountable, give them support, and help them succeed in their goals. But we've expanded way beyond that now. We now have worked with senior leadership teams, with strategic transformation and leadership development. We've got leadership training programs. We've got a whole range of culture change programs and other things that are but they all come back to the business owner and helping the business owner get a business that is delivering on their personal and life aspirations.
Big into town now as well as
bigger and smaller. Yes. So we still have a big focus on privately owned businesses. I mean, our tools are relevant to non-privately owned businesses as well, but in terms of our marketing and who we target, then it's predominantly privately owned businesses. But yes, it's now not just those smaller ones, it's right up to those more corporate private owned businesses that have got senior leadership teams.
Cool.
And so you initially, you're the master franchisee for Australia now, but initially you just ran the Queensland territory. Is that
that's
how
right.
it worked?
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So how did that come about? So negotiating with the US. So you haven't done this before.
No.
And you've decided to go and be a business owner because previously you're an employee and all these other
Absolutely.
things. So you're now putting it all on the line and saying, okay, we're going to, hubby, we're going to now own a business. And so that decision, that's a big decision.
It is. For me, it wasn't.
Yeah.
But you're right, it is a big decision. But for me, it wasn't. Firstly, because as a child, I had actually, when you say, what do you want to do when you grow up, and kids will go, I want to be a farmer or an astronaut or whatever, I actually used to say I wanted to be a business owner. Now, I don't think as a child I really understood what I was saying.
Because that would just sowing the fruit.
But
just coming off a hot run from the orchard.
But I did used to say that.
Bathing in cash.
And I genuinely, the roles I'd had throughout my career, I had a business owner mindset in those roles. So when I was GM of a business, I ran it like I owned it, and put the effort in like I owned it. So that was just in my DNA, that's how I went about doing things. So for me, it wasn't that big a decision because I just looked at, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to get to reap the benefits for myself instead of making money for other people. So for me, it wasn't that big a decision. What was the big decision is, if I'm going to own a business, what is that business? That was actually the bigger thing. And when I made the decision that business ownership was the direction I'd ideally want to go, which I did immediately after that corporate role, I spent quite a bit of time trying to work out what that business would be. Now, having had mostly SME experience in my life, and then that one stint at corporate, I knew instinctively that I wanted to be in the SME space. I didn't want to be, didn't matter what it was I didn't want to be in a role where my customer base was corporate. I wanted my customer base to be SME. So I was trying to work out what that was, because I was thinking, what skills have I got? What am I matched for? All of those kind of things. So I was just playing around every day on the computer, Googling things, just trying to get that spark, something that just made me fire up and go, yeah, I want to do that. And through doing that, I accidentally stumbled across the alternative board. I didn't know they existed. I just came across them. So I reached out to the US business
So
to learn more.
Was it in Australia at the time?
Sort of, but we were so far at the beginning that nothing had started in Australia yet. So technically, someone had signed an agreement for Australia, but hadn't actually started.
Yep.
So I was unaware that there was an Australian brand. So I found the US business. Now, I didn't realise at the point when I found them it was a franchise organisation.
What did you know about franchising at the time?
Only that I used to say I'd never be involved in franchising, ever. So it was good I didn't know it was a franchise organisation.
I wouldn't have kept going.
Because my perception of franchising up until that point had basically been based on McDonald's, which was, and I felt you had to be a robot and just do what you were told to do, whether you thought it was the right thing to do or not. And I'm actually quite an entrepreneurial person. And the idea of being put in a cage and just being told to do the same thing over and over again, I couldn't think of anything worse. And that's what I thought franchising was. So I've learned a lot since then. But I didn't know it was a franchise when I reached out. Found out fairly early on, but by then I was convinced enough by the model that I was willing to put that aside. Plus, my interactions with the US helped me realise that it wasn't going to be like you have to sit in this cage and stay there. You can't leave. But what really happened, though, was I was bounced back. Initially, I was bounced back from the US to Australia because there'd been a signed agreement just around that time. And so I actually explored just being a unit franchisee within the Australia. I would have been the first one in the Australia business. And at the time, because I was still in my 30s, I was like, this is a great business. I love the model. I can make lots of money at that. But I feel like, and knowing myself, I was like, I feel like I'd do it for a few years, build it up really well, and then want to do more. And I'd feel like I hadn't got the freedom, there was no headroom to do more. And I would end up leaving, selling the business, whatever. And I kind of didn't feel right doing that. I don't know why, because now I know so much about franchising, it wouldn't have mattered. It'd probably been good for the brand for them to have someone who did that. But for some reason, it didn't sit well with me. So I declined to move forward. At which point I was contacted by the global business based out of the US to say, can we discuss this further? And what resulted from that is, as you said, there was a decision made that the country would be split. I would get Queensland. The person who'd already signed the agreement got the rest of the country, and that was the start of the journey.
That's great. Good story.
And then you so from there you had your own franchisees in the Queensland market, and then over time acquired the rest of the business. So
yes.
So you realised that. So you were obviously comfortable with how it was going. You grew the Queensland business. So the next step, buying a bigger business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so how did that go? Bringing on franchisees that you didn't recruit, but were part of a different. Like you said, it wasn't. Tab's not a cookie cutter, so it's not exact. So it's not like everyone has to sell a Big Mac. There is a bit of flexibility in the model because of what you're doing. You're dealing with coaching and mentoring people in a group environment, so people are doing it differently. So that challenge of bringing on franchisees that probably weren't the franchisees that you would have recruited, how did you go about that?
That's actually when my learning in franchising really started. The first few years running the Queensland business, because Queensland isn't actually that big a place, the business was a small business. And so I had a very personal relationship with all of the franchisees in Queensland. And it worked really easily and really well. And we probably didn't have a lot of the characteristics of a franchise business because we just treated it like a collective. We were all part of the same business. We collaborated together. My learning really started when I took on the larger business of Australia, because I couldn't operate like that with a national business. You couldn't have that personal touch. I had to start turning it into a true franchise with good systems and good processes, and a support model that looked very different. And since that, and I took over that business in September 2019, so not the best timing because COVID hit 6 months later. But I have learnt so much, and I continue to learn a lot about how to scale a franchise business. And it is very different to scaling a corporate business or any other business. And I've got oodles of experience doing that, and felt like I knew exactly what I was doing. But I've learned that a lot of the things I would do in the corporate world don't work in a franchise business. And I've gone on a very steep learning curve.
So what's an example of that? So just because they're independent business owners, and
that's part of it.
You can't just tell them what to do and they don't like it, you sack them because they've paid to be into model. Is
Yep.
that
That's part of it.
So change management's more difficult, or what other things?
All of those things. All of those things. But I think the thing that was the biggest learning for me is I am a very naturally creative person. I'm very innovative. I'm not afraid to try new things and see whether they'll work. And I can be very loose with people in the trust that we're aligned towards the same outcomes and that we will get things done. And that worked really well in my corporate career because I was working with a bunch of employees who would then buy into that vision and that dream, and we would go together and it would work. I very quickly learned in franchising that approach isn't as easy, because you've got all these people who are also business owners and they've got their own ideas. And yes, they might be buying into your vision, but they've got a very different idea of how to achieve it. And they don't care what your direction is because they're business owners and they're going to make their own decisions. And the way it manifested for me was not understanding how important that franchise agreement was. Early on. So I didn't like my franchise agreement. I don't mean the one I have with the US, although that's another story. But I mean the one I had.
We'll talk about master franchising in a minute.
I meant the one that I have had in place with my franchisees, and when they would challenge me,
was that not dictated to you by the states?
Exactly. It was on a basis. I mean, I had some freedom to. Obviously, it was my responsibility to make sure it matched law here, and I had some freedom to change things if the market meant that made sense. But yes, it was there are lots of terms in our agreement that have to be there, and I have no choice. But I would look at them and go, with my corporate eyes on, oh my God, they're draconian. Oh my God, and like this. And when my franchise prospects would challenge me on the franchise agreement, I would struggle to defend the agreement because I didn't really understand the importance of it in the bigger picture of franchising. And so early on, I made some bad decisions to relent on a few things. Now I know exactly why, and I don't have a problem negotiating now. But I still find that I still don't like that part of the negotiations with a new franchisee because I can see their perspective. They look at it and go, that clause seems ridiculous because they're coming with a corporate background and they really don't understand how they actually don't own the brand. They're leasing the brand off us. So we have to maintain that control. And they also don't realise how important it is that their actions cannot damage the actions of anybody else in the system. And that I can't give them a better deal because they're good negotiators if I'm not going to be willing to give that same deal to everybody else in the system. And that's been a really big journey for me to become more structured myself, so that I can actually do that side of the master franchisor role. I do the growth and the creativity and all of that side of it very easily and naturally, but that was the bit that has been the biggest learning on my
So do you
journey.
negotiate your franchise agreement now, or it's
No,
just like,
not really.
sign it or get stuff?
Pretty much. There are certain elements that we put in there that we know we will end up negotiating on, and we're happy to. So, for example, it says you have to live in your territory in our franchise agreement. Now, that's so that we know if someone doesn't. We actually are okay for people to not live in the territory, and we'll put a special condition in if they don't. But what we don't want is for people to move from their territory, go and live on the other side of the country and try and run their franchise from remotely. That's not okay. So the fact that it's in the agreement means they have to tell us and we have to agree to it. So there are elements, little elements like that where, yes, we will relent on. But if someone comes in and wants to renegotiate the royalties and renegotiate this or that, no, we're not looking at that at all anymore.
And you can't make them work either. You know, you can't determine their motivation or their work ethic, can you?
Absolutely not.
Doing some stuff, but not others.
Yeah, and we because we know what sort of franchisee we want, or at least I know what sort of franchisee I want now. I try my best during the recruitment process to find the ones that are going to work hard and build a business. But you can never know for sure. It doesn't matter how good your recruitment programs are and your assessment programs and how good your emotional intelligence is. You can never know for sure until they actually start trying to do it. And in our business, we're recruiting very successful business people. People who've had very high-flying careers and have probably never put a foot wrong, and they've been constantly promoted throughout their lives. They've never found anything hard. And they're coming into a franchise, which, if you want to be in coaching and facilitation and helping business owners, it's a lot easier than doing it on your own. But it's not easy. And that's one of the other challenges sometimes is they come in, they've got this expectation that with a franchise it will just roll out, the clients will come in, it'll all just happen. And they get a bit of a rude awakening when they realise they've actually got to do a bit of work. So I'm always trying to make sure we've eliminated that's a problem. But unfortunately, sometimes it hits people really hard. And at that point, they either choose to step up or they don't.
It's been one of those dilemmas, isn't it, franchising, that you want... So your franchisees sound like they're quite entrepreneurial in that they've been successful at something before, but then you want them to follow a system because otherwise, if they wanted to be entrepreneurial, go and start your own coaching or facilitation business, call yourself whatever you like and do. But you've chosen to come into our model. So you need to do that. So
and it's not pick and mix.
So imagine you've got some big personalities amongst your franchisees that were challenging you all the time, and you're in this sort of role where you've got a master as well, because you're just you can say, well, that's why they do it. They're doing it like that in the US. I can't change that. So that must be hard because you don't have the ultimate decision in lots of things because you're just a franchisee like they are.
Absolutely. It is difficult, and you're right. We do have a lot of really big personalities in the system, and I really enjoy those big personalities. Actually, I get really excited by some of the things that they come up with that they want to do, but then at the same time, I have to sort of try and corral them to make sure that they don't step too far outside the lines. Herding cats. And some are easier than others because some, when I explain the why, they get it. Some, never having had any idea of what a franchise is about, sometimes fight me. And I have to be very careful of the wording I use because they are big characters, and sometimes I use exactly what you said. I want to say, why did you buy a franchise if you're not willing to do what we do? But with these big characters, if you say that, that's going to escalate into
all-out war,
a bit of a contest rather than a collaborative environment. So. And I don't always get it right, but I am constantly trying to, and again, the learning is constantly trying to work out and navigate those difficult conversations when you're trying to take someone who, part of you loves what they're doing, but part of you has to stop them because it's going to impact the franchise situation, and picking your fights as well becomes important so that you're not fighting with everybody. I'm not a fighter naturally. I don't like it. I'm not willing to fight if I have to, but I don't like it. So I don't want to be fighting with 10 franchisees at the same time. I'm not a Hollywood film that's got 25 arms and can take them all out at the same time. So it's been a big learning curve to sort of manage those big characters and corral them into using their strengths to build
Use their
around the
superpower for
franchise.
good,
Yeah,
not
exactly. Because they try and pick and mix. They recognise we've got great tools, but then they want to use them a different way, and it's a balance.
Are you enjoying it? Are you enjoying the challenge?
I am actually. Like anything, I mean, it isn't all unicorns and rainbows, and I definitely have some days where I think, partway through the day, when you're having one of those days where everyone who's getting in touch with you seems to be having a go at you about something. You get partway through the day and you want to throw your phone out the window and your computer and just go off into a desert island and not bother anymore. But overall, I get up the next day and I'm excited again. And I've been doing that for 10 years now. So it shows that I'm in an environment that really does fill my bucket. It's been a challenge to grow the business. There's been times where certainly my husband and a few other people have questioned, should I carry on because of how hard it actually is? Should I give up and find something else? And so there's been a number of occasions where I've sat back and reflected on that and tried to decide. And you know what? I can't see myself doing anything else. So the only option is to carry on and find the pathway through to get the success that I know the brand should have. And I really believe in the organisation. And
that's good.
Yeah.
So I've got a few of my clients that are master franchisees, and so you're a franchisee and you're a franchisor at the same time, and to be good at both, to be a franchisee, to be compliant and follow the system. So how do you find that balance for you? Like, do you think you're a good you've got to maintain a relationship with the US from a long way away, but then you're franchisee. So how do you find you're better? Which hat do you prefer to wear? And you're wearing both every day.
That's actually a very, very interesting question. I'm very aware that I do to my master what my franchisees do to me. Very aware of that. So it's in my relationship with the master franchisor, I sometimes actually end up saying to the worldwide CEO, he goes, I'll say, Jason, I understand where you're coming from. I have the same issue with my franchisees. But you have to realise how that's negatively impacting me, and that I'm not going to sit here and just stay in silence when you're doing something that is causing an issue. But no, I'm not as bad as my worst franchisee by a long shot. But I'm not a passive franchisee. And for me, and the reason it's a good relationship with the US is they know that it comes from passion for the brand. They know that at the forefront of anything I say is the fact I want this brand to be successful everywhere, not just here, but everywhere in the world. And so if I'm being difficult on something, it's not because I'm just being difficult because I don't like being told what to do. It's because I genuinely believe they're making a decision or doing something that is going to damage progress for the brand. And therefore we have a good relationship because they recognise that. They know I've developed a really good culture in Australia. The Australian franchisees engage at an international level, at which not all international communities do. And so I've got a good reputation, and in fact I was a finalist in the International Franchise Awards back in September, because what I do is recognised, but it is a relationship where I'm not passive, and as I say, I'm aware that I sometimes do to the master what my franchisees do to me.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Do you have any last questions?
No, that's all good. That's great. Enjoyed that story. That's very good.
So, last, we'd like to finish, we'll put a lot of the people that listen to the podcast are either thinking of franchising or emerging. You're even still in the emerging franchisor market, but what sort of tips, now that you've come from outside franchising into franchising, have you got any tips for franchisors?
Yeah, I do. And I'm probably specifically for those people who've come out of the industry, because obviously if you've been in the industry all your life and you end up running a franchise, you already know franchising. But for me, my experience has been coming from outside the industry. And yes, I would get involved in organisations where there is a wealth of experience in franchising early on in your career, and learn from them. I didn't do that. I forged my path my way. And I now know that had I have, having now got more involved in the franchise community, because in my head I needed to be at a certain point before I did it, I now realise that was the wrong way round. I should have got involved earlier, because I would have, a lot of the things that I've learned by making a mistake, I would have learnt from people who'd been there before me. Now, I'm not saying I'd have listened to all of it, because sometimes you have to go on your own path to really learn. But I feel the mistake I made was not getting involved with the franchise community earlier.
It's like we talk a bit about that. A lot of the emerging franchisors that we work with, that they, that they don't get involved in, whether it be the FCA or whether, there's lots of different sort of events. We run our own events as well, and because they just get stuck in doing their own business, and
Absolutely.
there's lots of things that they could learn from people that are competitors. The franchise industry is really good at people sharing and stuff like that. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I felt I couldn't afford it at the time, but now in hindsight, I feel like really, you can't afford not to.
Yeah. No, it's really good. Thank you very much for sharing your story. Thanks everyone for listening to our BDC Partners podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.
Jesus.
Thank
That
you.
was great.
All right,
Thanks,
it's great
Claire.
talking to you.